So last year I did a DIY solar power system. I installed a hybrid solar inverter with battery backup, and I installed just over 11,000 watts of solar panels up here on the workshop roof. So like I said, this is a DIY system. I did all the installation myself. I got the system approved and inspected by the power company where we can sell back our extra power. So after 1 year on solar with battery backup, was it actually worth it? What was all the problems I had? And I had several. What would I do differently if I did it again? And what's my plans for the future? That's what we're going to talk about today, so let's get into it. All right, let's talk about having batteries in your system. So one of the pros, of course, is going to be you have power when the grid is down. One of the other great benefits is that instead of selling the power back to the power company, you can store the power and then you can use it overnight. And typically, depending on what type of the year it is, my batteries will last till past midnight, or they may actually last all night long till the next day. And that keeps me from buying power from the power company, and it also keeps me from selling back power at a very cheap rate. So what were the cons of me having these batteries? Well, my number one has got to be temperature. These are temperature sensitive. They don't work in cold temperatures. And this is an unheated room in an unheated side of my workshop. In this winter it got down to -6. It did for several days, got that cold. And this room got below freezing. And when it gets below freezing, these batteries will not charge. So I went for a few days without charging these batteries at all. And one reason this room got probably too cold is because I didn't have a door installed. So I came out here, I installed this door so I could close this room up, and then I plugged in a small space heater. And then after that, the room stayed warm enough that the batteries charged and we got through that cold spell. So another con that everybody will bring up is the lifespan of the battery. And a lot of people are used to lead acid batteries like that's in their car, and they have to replace that battery every 4 to 6 years. Well, these are lithium iron phosphate batteries, and these have a 10-year warranty on them. And they have a 6,000 cycle rating, whatever comes first. And you would really be hard pressed to get 6,000 cycles within 10 years, because one cycle a day I think takes you to over 15. These are designed to last longer than 15. It's probably about the lifespan of the entire system you see here on the wall. In about 15 years you're probably going to look at replacing it all. So when I first installed this, I had several people concerned with me having roof mounted panels. And there are a lot of cons to having the panels up here on the roof. Now my personal con is that the roof itself. This is a metal roof and it gets very slick. If it is wet or if there's a lot of dust on here, you can slip and slide very easily. So I only get up here to work on these panels when it's dry. And I also try to pay attention to what type of shoes I use, because it really depends. You have to have a good rubber sole. It's a little bit tacky, you know, to be able to get up here and walk around. Now that being said, if this was an asphalt shingle roof, you'd have way more traction on that type of roofing. And there's actually metal roofing that has, like, I don't know what that's textured, and it has a lot more traction as well. And I wouldn't probably have any problems getting on one of those roofs when it's wet outside, but I would on this metal roof. So other than the access restrictions up here on the roof, I personally have no other issues with having the solar panels up here. I know a lot of people are concerned with leaks, that maybe you're putting holes in your roof when you mount it and that those will leak. But the way these new mounts are, you know, they're totally sealed, rubberized with sealant. I really don't see these new mounts leaking. I actually see the screws in the roof have a better chance of leaking than the actual mounts. Now I do have one other issue up here with the solar panels, and that is leaves from these trees back here getting under the solar panels and getting caught. Now I haven't had any bird nests under there, but I have had leaves get under there. Now you don't see them on this array, and the reason you don't see them up there is because I did a lot better job of managing the cables and keeping the wiring up. Now this array right here, I did a poor job of cable management, and those wires dangle down and they catch all of the leaves. So one thing I would do differently on this roof mount, and have done differently, I would really take my time making sure that all of my solar wiring and everything is tied down and tied up out of the way so that you don't get debris caught underneath the solar panels. So like I said, this system is grid tied, and I sell back all my extra power to the power company. But the problem is I buy it for 15 cents, and when they buy it back, they only buy it back for 3. And I had to, you know, fill out an application, get an inspection. I had to pay a few $100s for the application so that I could grid tie and sell them back power at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, when that's all done and said, is it really worth it? I don't necessarily know if it is, because you have to sell back 5 times the power that you buy to like zero out that power usage. Now, having a grid connection, I've already got the grid. Having a grid connection is worth it, I think, because there's always times that you use more power than what you produce. So having a grid connection, you need that. I think that's a definite, if it's available, that you should have it. But selling it back to the power company at these cheap rates, I'm not for sure. All right, let's go ahead and we'll start talking about some of the other problems we've had with the system. So I know a lot of people were concerned about snow being up on the roof, and I'd have like several days where I didn't have solar and I wouldn't be able to clean the panels. And this, I mean, we don't get a lot of snow here. We ended up with 2 days where the panels were covered with snow, and that's it. So snow wasn't a problem this winter. I know that that can change next winter. We may have a lot of snow and we may have several issues. But the first year, we only ended up with 2 days affected by snow. Any other days that we got snow, it melted off fairly quickly and was gone by the end of the day. So the biggest problem I had with this system was I had a bunch of arc fault detections. Now what an arc fault is the system detects a small arc, and that's normally like a loose connection, where it's loose enough where it's just kind of almost like where electrical connection sizzles a little bit. It's got like a little arc to it. And the problem with that is as those little arcs form, that creates heat, and heat can build up and it can start melting like connectors and eventually could turn into a fire. So the system has an arc fault detection built into it. It's now required for roof mounted systems. You have to have it by the National Electric Code here in the United States. And I kept getting these arc fault errors, and I would get them quite frequently. Hard to troubleshoot because you would get them randomly. Now, as the weather got colder, one thing about solar panels is voltage increases. So as it got colder and colder, the voltage increased and the arc fault detection increased as well. With that higher voltage, we started showing more arcs on some loose connections. And when it got to that really cold time of the year, when the batteries kind of shut down in January, when it was really cold, I ended up arc faulting constantly up here. And one thing that I didn't realize is I know that I had a trouble with one of these 3 arrays, but when it detects an arc fault, how many times can I say that, huh, in this video? But when it detects one, instead of shutting off the problem array, it actually shuts everything down. And I had no solar coming in for a few days before I realized that my system had that trouble. So then I came out here and I troubleshot, I switched off different arrays, and then I finally found the problem one and I disconnected it, and then I ran off of 2 arrays till like March because the roof was icy. I didn't want to get up on the roof. It goes back to the roof and the access restrictions. But finally, got a good weather day. It was actually in February, toward the end of February. I got up here. I ended up putting some new connectors on this set of solar panels, and that fixed the problem. I did get arc fault problems again later, and it ended up being this array, and I had to tighten some connections in the junction box for this array. But those problems seem to be gone now, but I had those really since the beginning of my system, and they continually got worse until it got to wintertime, and then it just like completely shut off the solar. It got so bad. And now that I've got everything fixed, I think since like March, it's been running fine. I haven't got those arc fault problems, and the issue seems to be resolved. So what about power outages? So we live out here kind of in the middle of nowhere, and we do have frequent power outages. We have mostly blips, like the power will just like blink on and off for, 1 to 5-10 seconds, and it'll come back on. That actually happens probably a few times a month. But we have had several short power outages. A lot of them, are probably 4 hours or less. And I think the longest power outage we've had was only like 6 hours. So we haven't had any extended power outages to really test the battery backup system and see how well it performs in a like a longer term grid down situation. Like if you had a hurricane go through and you didn't have power for days. So we never had anything longer, I think, than 6 hours. So the bad thing about a power outage is a lot of times you don't know it actually happens unless you see kind of the lights blink when it transfers over. You're not really aware that it's happening until you go out in one of our other buildings and you see that the power's out. So one time the power went off and we didn't even realize it. And Rebecca was doing laundry. She had the oven on because she was going to do a bunch of baking. And those are pretty big loads. And that drained the battery down. And we ended up losing power completely because we drained the batteries. And we've only done that once. And it's all because we didn't know that the power was actually out. If we would have, we could have not done those things, right? We could have managed what we were doing and made that battery last longer. But the problem was it was like early in the morning. So the batteries had already drained overnight and they were sitting at that minimum state of charge. And the sun wasn't quite up yet to charge the batteries. And it just ended up being like that perfect scenario where we didn't really have solar, the battery was already drained, and we drained it pretty quick. So let's go ahead, we'll get into the numbers, how much solar we made, how much money we saved. But to really understand our numbers, you got to look at kind of the timeline. So when we first started this system, we only had 2 solar arrays, just over 7,300 watts. And then in October, late October, we added the 3rd array, and that brought us to over 11,000 watts. So we had a few months where we had less solar production because of that. And then you got to look at all of the problems we had in the wintertime. So we had the batteries not charged because of cold weather. We had the arc fault problem, which shut off our solar panels. And then we disconnected a panel and ran for a couple months on 2 sets of arrays until we got the problem fixed. So we really had maybe, at least 4 or 5 months where we only ran off of 2 arrays instead of all 3 arrays. So that did lower our power usage, or power production, I should say. So I'm just going to go ahead, we'll compare what we did since August 1st of last year to July 31st of this year, 1 whole year, and we'll compare that to what my estimates were and see how close we turned out to be. So the solar power we produced in that 1 year period was 13,180 kilowatt hours. And I projected we would do 15,050 watts. So we were almost 2,000 kilowatt hours off. So that just over 13,000 kilowatt hours that we produced, that's on the DC side. And now you gotta invert that and change it into AC power that you can use in your house. And there is an efficiency loss when you do that. So we actually produced 12,258 kilowatt hours of AC power. And I think when a lot of people estimate their solar array, they forget about that efficiency loss. When you convert that from DC to AC, it's not going to be a 1-for-1. And for me, when we convert it, I lose about 7% of my power in that conversion. So I also estimated that I would sell back about 25% of my power to the power company. And last year I ended up selling back 27%. So that estimate was really close. And I sold back 3,342 kilowatt hours to the power company. And then they only bought it for 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And that ended up being only $101.34 on the buyback. Now, if I would have produced that power and used it myself, it would have been worth 15 cents a kilowatt hour. It would have been worth $501. So by selling it to the power company and not using it myself, I actually lost like $400. I could have saved $400 more if I could have just used that power instead of selling it back to them. So overall, what was the value of all of the power that we produced? How much did we save? What was it worth? So over that 1 year period, the power was worth $1,437.59. And I had projected $1,806. So we were short by about $370 we were short. Now I really think if we could have just had the full year of production with all 3 solar arrays, no problems, I think we would have met all of these projections. It's just it's just been one of those years. You know, you got little issues. It's a DIY system. You know, you learn along the way, and we've kind of had to work through it. And I think we've got everything fairly lined out now, and I think next year is going to be a lot better. So how does that relate to the total power that I use? How much am I actually producing? How close am I to being off the grid? Well, let me show you June. June of this, just like a couple months ago. I actually made 99% of the power that I use. That's how much I created, but I actually wasn't able to use it all. I ended up selling back 557 kilowatt hours, and I purchased 568 kilowatt hours. So I sold them almost exactly what I bought from them. But the problem was my electric bill still ended up being $68.49 worth of power on the electric bill. Even though I made pretty much 100% of my own power, it's that whole sell back at 3 cents and purchase it back at 15. And you just can't zero out your electric bill. It makes it almost impossible. Now that was my best month, and even at my best month, I still ended up having to pay for $68 worth of power. So I do have plans for more solar. I do plan to improve this system. I've got another 7,800 watts worth of solar that I'm going to put on the workshop roof. I'm going to fill it out completely. It's going to be full of solar panels when I'm done. And then I've also got a new inverter for more power and more battery, another battery to add so that I have more storage. And this is going to get me where I should be almost completely off grid. It should really help minimize selling back to the power company and just buying from the power company in general. And I've also started a brand new YouTube channel dedicated to DIY solar projects, and it's called Country View Solar. Pretty original name, right? So it's going to be more into the details. It's going to be more into the specs, how things work, how to put them together, properly get it installed. It's going to definitely be for people who like solar content. So if you like solar videos and you like that sort of thing, go over, check out Country View Solar. That's my new channel. I would appreciate it if you'd subscribe if you like that kind of content. And if you want to see a detailed one-year review of the Canadian Solar EP Cube system, head over to my new channel, Country View Solar. I've got a review video out, and we can go through all the details and what the pros and cons are of this system. So I'll still show a little bit of solar on this channel here, just kind of more of like the grand overview of building things and putting it together. But I'm going to leave those fine details and more of the geeky part of it. I'm going to leave that over on the other channel where I can kind of get into things that I enjoy, because I do have an electrical background. You know, I've done electrical work for 25 years, and this is the kind of thing I enjoy. And then that other channel is going to just give me an outlet to be able to work on and discuss that type of project. So overall, my first year on solar has definitely been a learning curve. Definitely had several problems to have to work through, and I think I finally got everything exactly the way I want it. And I know that I still want more. I want more power, and we're going to add it. I just want to be as energy independent as possible. I believe that's part of the homesteading side of things, is to try to be independent, self-sufficient. And that's the reason why I do the solar, is because I don't want to be dependent on the grid, dependent on the power company. If something bad happens, I want to know that we'll be fine without it. So that's the reason I do it, and planning on adding more. But I think that's going to be it for this video. So I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.